No woman could stay near the Alpha King. And yet, one night, a servant was found asleep on his chest. The first whisper of it didn't come as a rumor. It came as silence. A kind of silence that spread too quickly, too sharply, like something had gone wrong and no one dared to say it out loud. In the throne hall, the torches burned low and steady, their flames barely flickering, as if even fire knew better than to draw attention. The space around the Alpha King remained empty. Always empty. 10 feet in every direction. A perfect circle no one crossed. Not guards. Not nobles. Not even the High Council. He sat there unmoving, one hand resting against the arm of the obsidian throne, eyes half-lidded like a storm held behind glass. People said it wasn't a curse. They said it was instinct. That something in him, ancient, violent, untamed, pushed others away before they even realized it. Women had tried. They always did. Chosen daughters, trained courtiers, brave enough or desperate enough to step into that circle. None lasted long. One fainted before she reached him. Another stumbled back, shaking, her breath coming too fast to steady. A third had stood there, frozen, until tears slipped silently down her face and she begged to be dismissed. After that, no one volunteered. The court adjusted. Servants left trays at the edge of the invisible boundary. Guards rotated in wide arcs, careful not to drift too close. Even the king's own advisors spoke from a distance, their voices lowered, their eyes flicking away just a second too soon. And still he never acknowledged it. Not the distance. Not the fear. Not the way the entire hall seemed to breathe differently when he was present. He simply existed at the center of it. Untouched. Untouchable. Somewhere beyond reach. On the far edge of that same hall, a girl moved quietly with a cloth in her hands. Pale skin, soft features, hair pulled back too tightly as if to disappear into her own outline. A maid. Just another one. The kind no one looked at twice. She kept her head lowered as she wiped along the marble ledge, her steps light, measured. She didn't rush. Didn't linger either. Just moved as if she understood the rhythm of the place without ever being told. When the overseer passed, he didn't stop her. Didn't even glance her way. That was how she existed here. Unnoticed, unremarkable. Safe in a way. The closer tasks, the ones near the throne wing, were usually avoided. Assigned last. Or pushed onto those who couldn't refuse. Today, her name had been called without hesitation. No one argued. No one offered to trade. A faint murmur had followed her as she took the cloth and bucket. Not cruel. Not kind either. Just knowing. One of the older maids caught her sleeve for a second before she stepped away. "Stay far," she whispered, voice tight, eyes flicking toward the distant throne. The girl nodded once. No questions. No hesitation. Then she moved on. Past the pillars. Past the last safe line where servants usually stopped. The air changed first. Subtle. Like stepping into a room where a storm had just passed through. The girl slowed. Just a fraction. Her fingers tightened around the cloth. Then she kept walking. Behind her, a guard shifted his weight. The sound of metal brushing against metal broke the stillness for a heartbeat. Then faded. No one called her back. No one told her to stop. She crossed the invisible boundary without even realizing it. And for the first time in years, someone stood within arm's reach of the Alpha King, and did not fall. The first thing she noticed was the quiet. Not the usual hush of the hall, but something heavier, as if the air itself had paused to watch her. The girl kept her head lowered, though her steps slowed without permission. One more step. Then another. The cloth in her hand brushed against the edge of the throne platform, her fingers trembling just enough to leave a faint streak across the polished stone. No one spoke. Behind her, somewhere far beyond the pillars, a servant dropped something. The sharp clatter echoed too loudly. It didn't reach her. Or maybe it did, but her body chose not to react. The Alpha King didn't move. Not at first. He remained seated, his presence pressing outward in a way that should have forced her back. Should have made her knees weaken. Should have something. Instead, she inhaled slowly, almost cautiously, as if testing the air. Her shoulders lifted a fraction, then settled. A flicker passed through the torches lining the wall. Subtle. Almost nothing. But one of the guards near the entrance straightened, his gaze snapping toward her. Waiting. Watching for the moment she would break. It didn't come. She reached the base of the throne. Close enough now to see the faint marks etched into the black stone, old lines carved deep and worn smooth by time. Her hand hovered there for a second, uncertain. Then she lowered it and began to wipe. Slow. Careful. The cloth dragged softly against the surface, the sound almost too small to exist in such a vast room. Still it carried. The king's fingers shifted. Just once. A slight movement against the armrest. Not enough to draw attention, unless someone was already watching him too closely. The girl froze. Not fully. Just enough that the cloth stopped mid-motion. Her breath caught, barely audible. Then she resumed. Smaller strokes now. Controlled. Measured. As if she had decided something without thinking it through. Behind her, the guard took a step forward, then stopped himself. His jaw tightened. No orders came. No reaction from the throne. The king's gaze lowered. Not sharply. Not with intent. Just a slow tilt of his head, his eyes settling somewhere near her hands. Watching. The space between them tightened. Not physically, but something shifted. The girl didn't look up. Her focus stayed on the stone, on the faint smudge she kept wiping away even after it had disappeared. Her fingers brushed the edge of the throne itself. Barely. Skin against cold surface. No recoil. No flinch. Another torch flickered. This time 2 of them. A servant at the far end of the hall turned, eyes wide, whispering something too low to hear. The girl shifted her weight. Just slightly. Enough that her shoulder angled closer to the king's knee. Too close. It should have been too close. Her body tensed, then didn't. The tension didn't break her. Settled into something else. A quiet steadiness. As if the pressure that crushed others had found no place to take hold. The king's hand stilled completely now. No movement at all. His gaze didn't lift. Didn't sharpen. It lingered. A second too long. The girl finished the last stroke and pulled the cloth back, folding it neatly in her hands. She hesitated. A pause that stretched thin. Then she took a small step backward. Careful. Respectful. Waiting. For something. A command. A reaction. A dismissal. None came. The silence shifted again. This time it wasn't heavy. It was uncertain. Behind her the guard finally exhaled. Soft. Controlled. Like he hadn't realized he'd been holding it. The girl turned slightly, just enough to begin stepping away from the throne. But not before her sleeve brushed lightly against the edge of the king's arm. A fleeting contact. Accidental. Almost nothing. Except his fingers twitched. Sharp. Quick. Gone in an instant. The girl didn't react. She didn't even seem to notice. She simply kept walking, her steps quiet, her posture unchanged. But the hall behind her didn't return to normal. It couldn't. Because for the first time something had reached the Alpha King, and he hadn't pushed it away. The sound came late. Not when she stepped away. Not when her sleeve brushed him. But after 3 heartbeats later. A low, almost inaudible shift, like stone settling beneath weight that hadn't been there before. The girl slowed without meaning to, just for a step, then kept going. At the far end of the hall a goblet tipped. Wine spread across the marble in a dark, uneven line. No one moved to clean it. No one even looked at it for long. Their attention had already snapped back, to the space she had just left. Did you see? The whisper cut off halfway. A guard cleared his throat. Too loud. It echoed. The girl reached the edge of the invisible boundary, the place where others usually stopped. Her foot hovered, then crossed it. Nothing happened. No collapse. No stagger. She kept walking. Behind her the air didn't settle. It stayed altered. Like something had been disturbed and hadn't decided whether to return to stillness or not. On the throne the king remained seated. But not the same. His posture hadn't changed. His expression hadn't shifted. And yet, his hand, the one resting against the armrest, no longer lay relaxed. The fingers were slightly curled. Now, as if holding on to something that wasn't there. A councilman standing several yards away noticed it first. His gaze flicked down, then back up, uncertainty flashing across his face. He leaned toward the man beside him. "His Grace," he murmured. The other didn't respond. Couldn't. Because at that exact moment, the king's head tilted again. Fraction. Slower this time. Not toward the girl. She was already walking away. But toward the space she had occupied. His eyes followed nothing. And that was worse. A draft slipped through the high windows, brushing along the torches. Flames bent sideways, thin and strained. One sputtered. Went out. The sudden dimming shifted the hall's shadows, stretching them longer, sharper. A servant near the wall gasped, quick, involuntary, then clapped a hand over her mouth. The girl reached the corridor. The noise of the hall dulled behind her, swallowed by stone walls and distance. Her steps didn't quicken, didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around the cloth, pressing the damp fabric into her palm until it wrinkled. She paused once, just once, at the turn of the corridor. Her shoulder brushed lightly against the wall, as if she needed the contact to steady herself. Then she moved again. Back in the hall, tension climbed. Not loudly, not visibly, but it spread. A ripple no one acknowledged. The guard who had stepped forward earlier finally shifted his stance again. This time he didn't stop. He took one measured step closer to the throne. Testing. Waiting. The king didn't react. Not to him. Not to anything. But his gaze had dropped. Lower now. Fixed somewhere near his own hand. The same hand that had twitched when she touched him. Slowly, deliberately, his fingers uncurl. He looks at them. Just for a moment. As if something about them feels unfamiliar. Then stillness again. The guard stopped. His breath hitched before he forced it steady. "Your Grace," he said carefully. No response. Not even a glance. The silence stretched thin. Then, "Bring the next report." The voice came low. Even. Controlled. But there was a delay. Small. Almost imperceptible. The kind that wouldn't matter to anyone who hadn't been watching too closely. The guard bowed immediately, relief flashing across his face before he turned away. Movement returned to the hall. Slow at first. Then more certain. Voices rose again, cautious but present. Someone hurried to relight the torch. Another servant finally moved to clean the spilled wine. Order piece by piece stitching itself back together. But not quite the same. Not quite right. Because near the throne, the space where she had stood remained empty. No one stepped into it. No one dared. And the king, he didn't look at them. Not the council. Not the guards. Not the hall. His gaze lingered instead on the edge of the armrest. On the exact place where a sleeve had brushed past him. As if waiting for something to happen again. As if the absence itself had weight. And for the first time in years, the distance around him didn't feel like power. Felt like something missing. By midday, the hall no longer pretended nothing had happened. The whispers had shape now. Direction. They moved in tight circles between servants, slipped between guards, climbed the steps of the council like smoke that refused to clear. She stood there. Close enough to touch him. She did touch him. Each version sharpened the last. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. At the edge of the throne's circle, a senior attendant placed a tray down with careful precision. Too careful. The silver rattled faintly against itself. He froze. Waited. Nothing struck him down. No unseen force drove him back. But he didn't step any closer. Not even an inch. Across the hall, the council had gathered earlier than usual. Not summoned, drawn. Their voices stayed low, but their eyes kept drifting toward the throne. "We should test it," one murmured, fingers tapping against his sleeve. "Test what?" Another snapped quietly. "You think it's gone?" No answer came, because none of them believed that. On the throne, the king sat as he always did. Still. Composed. unreachable, but not untouched. His hand rested where it had before, along the armrest. Only now his thumb moved, a slow drag across the surface, back and forth, as if tracing a line no one else could see. It stopped, started again. Not a fidget, not nervous. Something else, something searching. A messenger approached, stopping well outside the boundary. He bowed deeply, voice steady but just slightly too fast. "Your Grace, the Southern envoy requests." Later. The interruption came without force, but it cut clean. The messenger blinked, thrown off by the timing. Not the refusal, the hesitation before it. A fraction too long. As if the decision had been weighed, then delayed. The man bowed again and stepped back quickly, relief and confusion crossing his face in the same breath. A guard near the pillar shifted, glancing toward the others. No one spoke. The king's gaze lowered again. Not toward the court, toward the empty space beside the throne, the place where she had stood, where no one now dared to stand. His eyes lingered there, just a second too long. Then he looked away. The doors at the far end opened with a sharp creak. The sound cut through the tension like a blade. All heads turned. A group of servants entered, led by the overseer. Their steps were aligned, their expressions carefully neutral. Routine. Nothing more. But the formation tightened as they approached the throne's wing. Subtle. Instinctive. No one broke rank until one did. A younger servant. New. She drifted half a step forward, not realizing she was crossing closer than she should. The overseer's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Hard. The girl flinched. A sharp intake of breath escaped her before she could stop it. The entire line halted. Every eye flicked to the throne. Waiting. The king did not move, did not look up. But his hand stilled again. Completely. The overseer released the girl at once, pushing her gently, but firmly, back into line. No words. Just a warning in the tightness of his jaw. They adjusted. Continued. Slower now. Careful. The moment passed. Or seemed to. But something lingered. A ripple that refused to flatten. The king's gaze lifted, just slightly. Not toward the servants. Not toward the overseer. But past them. To the corridor beyond. The same one she had disappeared into. His eyes narrowed. Barely. Then relaxed. A pause settled over him. Not imposed. Chosen. And for a brief second, so brief most would miss it, his posture shifted. A fraction forward. As if he might rise. He didn't. The movement stopped before it began. His fingers curled once more against the armrest, tighter this time. Then loosened. A decision made. Or avoided. Continue, he said quietly. The word wasn't for anyone specific. And yet the entire hall obeyed. Movement resumed. Voices returned. The illusion of control rebuilt itself around him. But the distance, the perfect, untouched distance that had once defined him, no longer felt absolute. Because now everyone had seen it. The hesitation. The almost movement. The way his attention had strayed toward something, or someone not present. And once power cracks even just a little, it is never quite whole again. By evening, the palace had found its rhythm again. Or something close enough to pass as one. Orders were given. Reports delivered. Servants moved in practice lines, their steps measured, their voices low. The earlier tension didn't vanish, it folded inward, tucked beneath routine like a blade hidden under cloth. At the far corridor, the girl stood with a basin of water balanced carefully in her hands. The surface trembled once, then stilled. She adjusted her grip. Continued forward. No one stopped her this time. No warnings. No whispers loud enough to catch. But eyes followed. Briefly. Then looked away. As if watching her too long might invite something unwanted. She reached the smaller chamber near the throne wing. A place for minor duties, polishing, preparation. Safe work. Safe distance. She set the basin down. The soft clink of ceramic against stone echoed lightly. Her fingers lingered on the rim a second longer than needed. Then released. Across the hall, the throne stood occupied once more. The king had resumed his place hours ago, and the court had settled around him as if nothing had shifted. Advisors spoke. Guards rotated. Even the spacing, the careful, invisible circle held steady, untouched, restored, or so it appeared. A scroll was handed forward, stopping well short of the boundary. The king reached for it. His movement was precise, controlled. No hesitation this time. The parchment slid into his hand without incident. He unrolled it slowly, eyes scanning the contents. A breath passed, then another. He lowered it. Approved. One word. Clean. Final. The councilman bowed quickly, relief flashing before he stepped back. A few exchanged glances. Subtle. Quick. The kind that asked without speaking, see? It's over. The hall seemed to agree. The earlier ripple smoothed itself out. Torches burned steady again. Voices steadied. Even the guards relaxed, their stances easing just a fraction. Control had returned. The king set the scroll aside. His hand rested again on the armrest. Still. Composed. But his fingers didn't quite settle. The thumb pressed once against the stone. Then again. Slower. Not enough to draw attention, unless someone was already looking. In the smaller chamber, the girl dipped the cloth into the basin. Water darkened slightly as it absorbed dust. She wrung it out, the twist of fabric sharp, deliberate. A drop slid down her wrist. She didn't shake it off. Just let it fall. Her shoulders rose on a quiet breath. Fell just as slowly. She moved to the window, wiping along the frame. Outside, the sky had shifted toward dusk, the light thinning into softer tones. For a moment the palace felt ordinary. The kind of quiet that came at the end of a long day. The kind that suggested everything would continue as it always had. Her hand slowed, paused, then resumed. Back in the hall, a servant approached the edge of the boundary with a fresh tray. He placed it down carefully. No rattle this time. No slip. He stepped back immediately, bowing low before retreating. The king didn't reach for it right away. The tray remained untouched for several seconds, longer than usual. Long enough for a nearby guard to notice. Long enough for the silence to stretch thin again. Then movement. The king's hand lifted, reached, took the goblet. Smooth, certain. He brought it to his lips, drank, set it back down. Exactly as expected. The guard exhaled softly, tension easing from his shoulders. Around him, others seemed to settle again. See, nothing had changed. Nothing would. The girl finished her task, folded the cloth neatly. She stood there a moment longer than necessary, her gaze resting not on her work, but on the doorway, leading back toward the hall. Just a second. Then she turned away. The basin remained where it was. The water inside barely disturbed. In the hall, the king's gaze lifted. Not toward the council. Not toward the guards. Toward the corridor. Empty. Quiet. He held that direction a moment. Too long. Then forced his focus back to the room. His hand stilled again on the armrest. Perfectly still. As if willing it so. And for a while it worked. The palace breathed evenly. The distance held. The illusion of control remained intact. But beneath it, quiet, persistent, waiting, something had not returned to its place. The break didn't come with a shout. Came with a stumble. A servant, young, unfamiliar, misjudged the edge of the boundary and stepped too far in. 1 foot. That was all. The tray in his hands tilted. A single cup slid, struck the stone and rolled slow, deliberate, into the empty space near the throne. Every sound in the hall snapped off. The servant froze. His breath hitched shallow fast. He didn't dare move forward. Didn't dare retreat. The cup came to rest just short of the king's boot. No one stepped in to retrieve it. No one spoke. The king did not look down. Not immediately. His gaze remained forward, fixed on nothing, as if the world had paused and he was deciding whether to acknowledge it. 1 second. 2. Then his eyes shifted. Lower. The smallest movement. But it pulled the entire room with it. The servant swallowed hard, his hands trembling now, empty without the tray. "Your Grace." The words slipped out before he could stop them. A mistake. Immediate. His voice cracked. The sound echoed too sharply. A guard took half a step forward, then stopped, waiting for a command that didn't come. The king's hand tightened against the armrest. Not violently, but enough that the knuckles showed pale beneath the skin. His gaze lingered on the fallen cup, then lifted. Slowly. Not to the servant. Past him. Toward the corridor again. Always the corridor. A shift rippled through the hall. Uneasy. Uncertain. The servant remained frozen, caught between instinct and fear. "Retrieve it," a councilman whispered urgently, too low for most to hear, but loud enough. The servant didn't move. Couldn't. His body refused. His foot stayed planted where it had crossed the line. The invisible boundary pressed against him now, heavy, suffocating. The king exhaled. Soft. Controlled. But not steady. His chest rose slightly deeper than before. His fingers loosened, then curled again. The pause stretched. Something in it sharpened. And then movement. He leaned forward. Just enough to break the stillness that had defined him for years. The motion was small. But in this room it was thunder. A guard inhaled sharply. Another shifted his stance, hand hovering near the hilt at his side. Not in threat but in reflex. The king's hand lifted from the armrest. Slowly, deliberately. He reached not toward the servant, toward the cup. The distance closed inch by inch. No one breathed. His fingers hovered above the object. Stopped. For a fraction of a second they trembled. Barely visible. Then he picked it up. Simple. Controlled. Impossible. The servant staggered back as if struck, stumbling out of the boundary without realizing it. A murmur broke through the hall, sharp, scattered, quickly swallowed. The king held the cup in his hand, looked at it. Not with confusion, not with anger, with something quieter. Then he set it back onto the tray the servant had dropped. Precise. Exact. The action should have ended it. Restored order. But it didn't, because he didn't lean back immediately. He stayed there, slightly forward, his gaze no longer distant. It flicked once more toward the corridor. This time it didn't leave. The councilman who had spoken earlier straightened, sensing the shift. "Your Grace," he began carefully, "shall we continue?" No, the word cut through him. Not loud, but final. The room stilled again. Not out of fear this time, but anticipation. The king's posture changed. Not fully, but enough. His shoulders set. His chin lifted just slightly. A decision forming. Or breaking. He didn't sit back. Didn't return to stillness. Instead he stood. The movement was slow. Controlled. But unmistakable. Chairs scraped faintly as several council members rose halfway before catching themselves. Guards straightened, their formation tightening. Instinctively. No one spoke. No one understood. Because he had never done this. Not without reason. Not without command. His gaze remained fixed on the corridor. Unmoving now. Unhidden. And when he stepped forward, one measured step, crossing the edge of his own perfect boundary, the illusion shattered completely. The moment his foot crossed the boundary, the room forgot how to breathe. It didn't happen all at once. First, a chair scraped too loudly against stone. Then a second. Someone's sleeve brushed a goblet, sending a thin ring of sound through the silence. And then nothing. Stillness snapped tight across the hall. The Alpha King did not stop. One step became two. Slow. Measured. Unavoidable. The space that had always belonged to him, perfect, untouched, collapsed behind him like it had never existed. A guard near the pillar turned his head too quickly, the motion sharp, almost disobedient. Another shifted to follow, instinct pulling him forward before discipline dragged him back into place. "Stay," someone whispered under their breath. It wasn't an order. It was a plea. The king didn't look at them. His gaze remained fixed ahead, toward the corridor, toward something no one else could see. The council broke first. Not loudly, not in panic, but in movement. One rose fully to his feet, then another. A third took a step forward as if to speak, then faltered when no one else followed. Their formation dissolved into uncertainty. Lines blurred. Hierarchy thinned. The king continued walking. Each step echoed differently now. Not contained by the throne's circle. Not softened by distance. The sound carried. Deep. Certain. A servant near the wall dropped to one knee without thinking. Head bowed so low her forehead nearly touched the floor. Another followed. Then another. A ripple of submission moved outward, uneven, uncontrolled. Some knelt. Some froze. Some simply stared, unable to decide which instinct to obey. The guards tightened formation again, but this time it wasn't clean. One moved too far ahead. Another lagged half a step behind. Their spacing fractured, small gaps opening where none had existed before. The king passed between them without slowing. His coat brushed the air, the faint movement enough to make one of them flinch. He didn't acknowledge it. The corridor ahead seemed longer than it should have been. Darker. The light from the hall stretched thin behind him, unable to fully follow. At the threshold he paused. Not fully. Just enough for the pause to exist. His head tilted slightly, listening. For what no one knew. Behind him the hall held its breath again. A councilman took a careful step forward. "Your Grace," he said, voice low, controlled. "If there is a matter." No response. The king's hand lifted. Not in command. Not in dismissal. It hovered in the air for a second, fingers slightly curled, as if reaching for something just out of sight. Then it lowered again. Decision delayed. Not denied. A flicker passed through the torches lining the corridor. One dimmed. Another sputtered. The light shifted, shadows stretching unevenly across the stone walls. A draft moved through the space, colder than before. Sharper. The king stepped forward again. Into the corridor. Fully leaving the hall behind. That was when the control broke. Not in chaos, but in sound. Low voices rose at once, overlapping, uneven. "He's leaving. Where is he? Stop him. Don't." The contradictions tangled together, none strong enough to take hold. A guard moved as if to follow directly behind him, then hesitated at the threshold, his foot stopping just short of crossing into the corridor. His jaw tightened. He waited. For permission. For command. For anything. None came. The king did not look back. His steps continued, steady, unhurried, as if the palace itself would rearrange to follow him. Behind him, the corridor seemed to pull the silence inward, swallowing the noise from the hall piece by piece. The girl stood at the far end, half turned toward the doorway, the basin left behind, the cloth still damp in her hand. She hadn't moved far. Not far enough. Her shoulders were still, but her fingers had tightened around the fabric, twisting it without realizing. The sound of his steps reached her before she saw him. Slow. Even. Closer. The hall behind him faded. The murmurs, the shifting, the fragile attempts at control. All of it dimmed. Into something distant. Because now, for the first time, the distance between them wasn't enforced by fear. It was closing. And no one in the palace knew how to stop it. She didn't step back. That was the first thing that broke the pattern. Anyone else would have. Anyone else would have felt it. The weight in the air, the quiet pressure that made lungs tighten and instincts scream to retreat. But she stayed where she was, half-turned, the damp cloth twisted in her hand, her breath shallow but steady enough to hold. His steps slowed as he neared her. Not stopping. Never fully stopping. Just less certain. A fraction shorter. A fraction softer. The corridor narrowed around them, the walls pulling the moment inward until nothing else seemed to exist beyond the space between them. 10 feet. 8. 5. The distance that had defined him for years gone. Behind him, far back at the threshold, a guard shifted forward, then froze, his boot hovering just above the stone before settling back. No one crossed. No one followed. This was not a place they understood anymore. The king stopped. Close enough now that the edge of his shadow reached her feet. close enough that the faint movement of his coat stirred the air between them. She lowered her gaze, not in fear, not fully, but because looking directly felt like stepping too far. Her fingers tightened once around the cloth, then loosened. A drop of water slid free, falling to the stone between them. The sound was small, sharp. It held. He noticed. His eyes flicked down. Not to her. To the drop. The same way he had looked at the fallen cup. The same pause. The same stillness before choice. His hand lifted. Slowly. Not reaching for her. Not yet. Just rising. It hovered between them, fingers slightly curled, as if remembering something instead of deciding it. She didn't move. Her shoulders remained still, but her breath shifted. One inhale deeper than the last, barely controlled. The air pressed in. Waiting. He stepped closer. One more step. The last of the distance collapsed. Close enough now that her sleeve brushed the front of his coat when she exhaled. Accidental. Unavoidable. The contact lingered for less than a second. But it happened. Nothing broke. No force pushed her back. No reaction tore through the space. Only his breath changed. A subtle hitch. Almost nothing. His hand lowered. Not away. Down. Until his fingers hovered near her arm. Not touching. Not quite. The space between skin and skin held tighter than any distance before it. His gaze dropped again. This time to her hand. The cloth twisted there. Damp. Worn. Ordinary. His fingers moved. A fraction closer. Then stopped. A pause. Longer now. Not hesitation born from fear, but from something unfamiliar. A choice without precedent. She shifted her weight. Just slightly. Enough that her sleeve slid again. This time against his wrist. A second contact. Softer. Slower. Deliberate or not, it stayed a heartbeat longer. His hand closed. Not around her. Around the fabric. Lightly. The cloth stilled between them. The corridor seemed to contract, the shadows tightening along the walls as the torches flickered unevenly. Behind them a faint sound, someone drawing breath too sharply, quickly silenced. He didn't let go. Not immediately. His fingers remained there, resting against the cloth, against the edge of her hand. No force. No claim. Just contact. His gaze lifted. Finally. Not scanning. Not commanding. Looking at her. Directly. For the first time. The moment stretched. Thin. Fragile. She didn't flinch. Didn't pull away. Her head tilted just slightly upward. Enough to meet his eyes without fully raising her chin. The stillness shifted again, but not into pressure. Into something quieter. Something that didn't push. Didn't demand. Just held. His grip loosened. The cloth slipped free. Fell slightly between them. But he didn't step back. Didn't rebuild the distance. Instead, his hand remained where it was, suspended in that narrow space, as if unsure where it belonged now. A breath passed. Then another. And in that silence, no collapse, no retreat, no command. Only one truth remained, undeniable to anyone who had witnessed even a fragment of it. Whatever had kept the world away from him, did not keep her away at all. No one entered the corridor. That became the first rule. It wasn't spoken. It wasn't ordered. But it held. At the threshold, guards stood rigid, their formation no longer about control but about distance, keeping others back, not the king contained. Council members lingered behind them, their voices gone, their presence reduced to still figures watching something they could not explain. Inside, the silence settled differently. Not heavy, not pressing, just altered. The girl didn't move. Not even after his hand released the cloth. It hung loosely between her fingers now, damp and forgotten. Her shoulders lowered by a fraction, the tension that had held her upright easing, not disappearing but changing shape. He remained where he was. Close. Too close for anything that had ever been allowed before. The air between them stayed intact, undisturbed by the force that had driven others away. His hand lowered slowly to his side. Not withdrawn. Just placed. as if he had nowhere else to put it. His gaze didn't leave her. It didn't sharpen into command, didn't soften into something recognizable. It simply stayed, watching, holding, measuring something no one else could see. Behind them the hall shifted, not loudly, but in movement. A guard adjusted his stance, then stopped, realizing he had leaned forward without meaning to. Another lowered his weapon hand, the tension slipping from his fingers. A servant who had knelt earlier rose halfway, uncertain, then remained there, caught between positions. The old structure of the room, the careful spacing, the invisible hierarchy, no longer aligned. It bent, subtly, around the corridor, around the absence of the king's presence at its center. A councilman finally stepped forward. Not into the corridor, never that, but closer than before. His voice came low, controlled, but it carried. "Your Grace," he said, choosing each word carefully, "the court awaits your command." The words hung there, expected, familiar, the kind of prompt that had always brought the world back into alignment. The king did not answer. Not immediately. His gaze flicked once, just once, toward the voice, then back to her. The pause stretched, longer than any before. The councilman's jaw tightened. He didn't repeat himself, didn't dare. The girl shifted her weight again. A small movement, enough that her foot brushed lightly against the stone. The sound carried. He noticed. His eyes dropped, then lifted again. A breath passed through him, visible this time. His chest rose, fell. Not controlled, not perfectly. Then, wait. The word was quiet, almost soft, but it cut through everything. The councilman stilled. The guards froze. The servants didn't move, because the word had not been given to them. It had been given to the moment itself, to the interruption, to the world that expected him to return. And he refused, not with force, not with defiance shouted into the hall, but with stillness, with presence, with the simple act of not stepping back. The corridor held. The space between them held. The palace adjusted. Slowly, reluctantly. Guards no longer looked at the throne when awaiting orders. They looked toward the corridor. Servants carried their tasks along the edges, careful, quiet, but their attention drifted, pulled again and again toward that unseen center. The council remained standing, waiting. No one resumed their seats. No one spoke above a whisper, because the axis had shifted, not broken, not destroyed, but moved, from a throne no one could approach, to a space no one could interrupt. The girl finally lifted her gaze fully, not high, not boldly, just enough to meet his without lowering her head again. The movement was small, but it stayed. He didn't look away, didn't command her to, didn't step back to restore what had been. And in that quiet, undeniable stillness, where distance had once defined power and fear had once enforced it, the truth settled into every corner of the palace without a single word spoken. The Alpha King no longer stood alone, and nothing in his world would ever return to what it was before.